Welcome, dear subscribers and curious listeners of my channel. The story of the Harry Potter captured the hearts of millions not just because of its thrilling plot, but thanks to its incredibly vivid characters. And yet, with so many heroes in the spotlight, it's inevitable that some would be left undeservedly in the shadows. Today, we'll try to right that wrong and remember those who stayed behind the scenes of fan adoration, but certainly deserve more attention. Make yourself comfortable. This is going to be interesting. Number 1, Kreacher. Grim, grumbling, always displeased. From the very start, Kreacher was more off-putting than endearing. His contempt for the members of the Order of the Phoenix, along with his betrayal of Sirius Black, conveniently glossed over in the films, made him one of the most disliked characters. But everything changed in Book 7. Kreacher tells Harry how Voldemort forced him to test the cursed locket on himself and how he failed to fulfill his master Regulus Black's final wish. From that point on, Kreacher seems transformed. He helps Harry, cooks, runs the house, and even inspires other house elves during the Battle of Hogwarts. His story is one of loyalty, pain, and redemption. Number 2, Percy Weasley. To many, he's a bore, a careerist, even a traitor. And in part, that's true. Percy is someone far too invested in rules and the pursuit of recognition. He distanced himself from his family, condemned his father, and refused to believe in Voldemort's return. But in the end, he came back. He returned to his family just before the final battle, apologized, embraced his mother, and stood beside them when his younger brother died. It's a bitter but important story about making mistakes and finding the courage to make them right. Unfortunately, this storyline was left out of the films. Number 3, Viktor Krum. How easy it would have been to make him a cocky, smug Quidditch idol. But J.K. Rowling chose a different path. Viktor turned out to be reserved, sincere, and not at all what people expected. He chose Hermione, someone no one would have expected to be the girlfriend of a star. He respected her, was genuinely interested in her, tried to understand her. And although his appearance is mostly limited to Goblet of Fire and a brief cameo, later on Krum is one of those characters who quietly break the mold. Number 4, Luna Lovegood. Strange, unpredictable, sweet, wonderful. Luna wears radish earrings, talks about imaginary creatures, and sees the world in a way no one else does. At first, she seems simply quirky, but with every book, her true depth begins to show. She believes Harry when no one else does. She joins Dumbledore's army. She supports her friends. She speaks wisdom, and in the darkest moments, she stays true to herself. Luna reminds us that being different doesn't mean being less. Number 5, Rita Skeeter. Few characters have sparked as much irritation. Well, except maybe Umbridge. Rita is the queen of sleazy journalism. She mocks Hagrid, tears apart Hermione's reputation, digs into Dumbledore's past. Her articles cause storms and ruin lives, and yet Rita isn't a Death Eater. She doesn't serve the dark. She's simply a reflection of a world where fame and attention matter more than truth. A deeply unpleasant character, but brilliantly written. She's easy to dismiss, but she doesn't deserve to be forgotten. Number 6, Regulus Black. A name mentioned in passing, yet behind it lies tragedy and heroism. Regulus grew up in a family where Voldemort's ideals were treated as sacred. He became a Death Eater just as his family expected. But then he saw the truth. He saw that Voldemort would even torture house elves to achieve his goals, and so he did the unthinkable, discovered the secret of the Horcruxes, stole one, and knowingly walked to his death to try to destroy it. A quiet hero, unnoticed, but it's thanks to people like him that darkness was ultimately defeated. Number 7, Kingsley Shacklebolt. In the films, he appears briefly and sporadically, but in the books, Kingsley is one of the most reliable, talented, and intelligent fighters. He's an aura, a spy within the Ministry. He keeps an eye on Fudge to prevent disaster. He fights on the front lines, including during the Battle of Hogwarts, and after the war, he's entrusted with leading the entire magical world, becoming the new Minister for Magic, calm, resolute, and fair. Kingsley is a perfect example of a true leader stepping out from the shadows. Number 8, Lee Jordan. Lee Jordan was more than a jokester, more than the Quidditch commentator who shouted, "And that's another one for Gryffindor." While McGonagall rolled her eyes, he was bold, loud, and full of energy, but underneath the laughs was steel. When the Death Eaters took control of the Ministry, Lee didn't hide. He fought back with his voice. He created Potterwatch, a secret radio broadcast that spread truth when lies flooded the wizarding world. He gave people hope when the Daily Prophet gave them fear. He risked everything. The broadcasts were illegal, deadly, but Lee kept speaking. He gave updates on Harry's movements, shared news of rebel actions, let people know they weren't alone. "This is River," he said on air, his code name, "and the truth is still out there." He invited Lupin, Kingsley, and Fred to speak. Together, they reached every hidden wizard and witch in Britain. Lee didn't fight with a wand, he fought with words. And in a time when truth was dangerous, that made him one of the bravest voices in the war. Number 9, Oliver Wood. Oliver Wood lived for Quidditch. He paced the locker room like a general before battle. "We're going to train harder than we've ever trained before," he told the team in Prisoner of Azkaban, eyes blazing. To some he sounded obsessed, maybe even ridiculous. But behind the obsession was heart. He believed in every player. He never mocked Neville for falling off brooms or scolded Harry for mistakes. He pushed them not to win for himself, but for each other. He knew that unity mattered more than talent. After graduating, Wood could have disappeared from the story, but he returned. During the Battle of Hogwarts, he came back, not as a student, not as a Quidditch star, but as a soldier. He led the charge with the same passion he once reserved for the pitch, shoulder to shoulder with Katie Bell, Angelina Johnson, and Alicia Spinett, his team, his family. He wasn't chasing trophies anymore. He was fighting for Hogwarts. And when the walls shook and curses flew, Oliver Wood proved he was never just about the game. He was always about the people. Number 10, Madame Pomfrey. Madame Pomfrey never needed a spotlight. She didn't wear shimmering robes or make grand speeches in the Great Hall, but without her, Hogwarts would have fallen apart. She mended broken arms, cured hexed faces, regrew bones, and reversed full-body petrifications. And she did it all without panic, without praise. When Harry returned from the Chamber of Secrets barely alive, it was Madame Pomfrey who took him in. No questions, just care. "You've had enough excitement for a lifetime," she told him. And then she got to work. She treated Ron after the chessboard incident, Hermione after her Polyjuice disaster, Harry after Quirrell's attack, after the Triwizard Tournament. When Harry stumbled into the hospital wing clutching Cedric's body, it was Madame Pomfrey who steadied him, who helped him sit, who wrapped him in a blanket. She couldn't fix grief, but she stayed beside him while he broke. She didn't ask for thanks, she just stayed. When Dumbledore died and Hogwarts fell into darkness, Madame Pomfrey didn't leave. She stayed during Snape's regime. She watched students get dragged in, wounded by Carrow's punishments. She healed them in silence. She never took sides in politics, but she always took the side of the suffering. "There's no place for cruelty in this school," she once said to Umbridge. And even that simple line was defiance. During the Battle of Hogwarts, she never raised a wand to duel, but her magic never stopped. She ran from corridor to corridor, healing fighters, dragging wounded out of the rubble, shouting orders like a general in a white apron. She didn't fight with curses. She fought with care. She saved lives while others ended them. And in a story filled with warriors and legends, Madame Pomfrey was the quiet strength behind them all. Number 11, Emmeline Vance. Emmeline Vance didn't seek attention. She didn't need it. She was part of the original Order of the Phoenix, one of the few who stayed in the fight after it all went quiet, after Voldemort fell the first time. When many returned to normal lives, she kept watching, waiting. She knew evil never really sleeps. When Dumbledore called again, she came back without hesitation. Sirius mentioned her once. "That's Emmeline Vance," he told Harry at Grimmauld Place. "She's been doing top-secret work for the Order." Her name barely appeared in the books. Her face only flickered past in a memory. But the Ministry knew who she was. So did Voldemort. That's what made her dangerous. She carried information. She was trusted. Dumbledore sent her on missions he wouldn't give to others. She travelled, hid, delivered messages between spies. She vanished for weeks at a time, and no one questioned her loyalty. Not once. The Daily Prophet said her body was found in a London alley. She'd been killed cleanly, efficiently. "Vance's death," said Mad-Eye Moody, "was no random act. That was you-know-who's work." He was right. Voldemort ordered it himself, not because she was famous, not because she was a leader, but because she was effective, quiet, and deeply dangerous to the cause of darkness. She never betrayed her people, not even in death. No statues were built for her, no speeches given. Her name faded from the pages as the war grew louder. But her silence was never weakness, it was strength. Emmeline Vance fought in the shadows. She died in silence, but she died standing, loyal to the very end. Number 12. Ted Tonks. Ted Tonks broke every rule the old families held sacred, a Muggle-born who married Andromeda Black, cousin to Bellatrix, sister to Narcissa. He wasn't rich, he wasn't pure blood, he wasn't supposed to matter, but he did, because he had courage, he loved freely. And when the Black family erased Andromeda from the family tree, Ted stood beside her and didn't flinch. They raised Nymphadora together, a girl who'd become an aura, a fighter, a hero, just like him. When Voldemort took over the Ministry, Ted became a target, Muggle-born, marked for punishment. He refused to register, refused to kneel, so he ran into the forests, into the shadows. He wasn't alone. Dean Thomas joined him, Dirk Cresswell, Griphook. Ted wasn't just running, he was leading. He helped others survive, gave them hope, fed them stories. "My Dora's still fighting," he told Dean, "and I'll keep fighting too." He could have tried to disappear, lay low, let someone else carry the burden. But Ted never hid from what mattered. He knew they'd catch him. The Snatchers were everywhere, but he kept moving. He kept resisting. When they finally surrounded him in the woods, he didn't beg. He didn't scream. They say he died with his wand in hand, back straight, eyes clear. He died for no bloodline, no glory, just the right to live as he was. His name wasn't read aloud at the final battle. No portrait hangs in Hogwarts, but his legacy lives in the ones who survived. In Dora, in Teddy, in every wizard who stood up when it was easier to stay down. Ted Tonks was the kind of man Voldemort feared the most, an ordinary man who refused to be broken. Number 13, Dean Thomas. Dean Thomas was always in the background, Quidditch player, dorm mate, the quiet kid, sitting near Seamus, sketching logos for the West Ham team. He dated Ginny, he laughed with friends, but he never stood in the centre, not like Harry, not like Ron. Still Dean was watching, listening. When Seamus called Harry a liar in 5th year, Dean didn't join in. He kept his mouth shut, but his eyes said everything. Then the Ministry fell. Everything changed. Dean vanished. No one knew where he went. He became a ghost, living in forests, moving by night. He couldn't prove he was a half-blood. His father had disappeared when Dean was a kid, killed by Death Eaters. Dean didn't know that, but he knew he had a target on his back. He refused to register, refused to bow. While others sold their souls for safety, Dean ran, cold, hungry, wandless, and free. He wandered with Ted Tonks and Dirk Cresswell, with goblins and outlaws. He slept under trees and watched the stars. Snatchers hunted them. When they got caught, Dean ended up in Malfoy Manor. He was locked in the cellar with Luna Lovegood and Griphook. He didn't cry, he didn't beg. He waited, watched, planned. Luna asked him, "Do you think he's still alive?" And Dean said yes. He meant Harry. He meant hope. When the final battle started, Dean came back. No wand, he grabbed one. No time, he fought anyway. He stood with Neville, with Seamus, with Luna, with Hogwarts. His name was never in the papers. No statues were built for him, but he didn't care. Dean Thomas didn't need glory. He had already made his choice. And when the world went dark, he helped carry the light. Number 14, Arthur Weasley. Arthur Weasley never sought the spotlight. While his children, Fred and George with their wild jokes, Ginny with her fierce determination, captured attention, Arthur moved quietly through the story. Yet it was his steady presence that held so much together. In a world obsessed with bloodlines and status, Arthur stood as a quiet rebellion. He worked in the misuse of Muggle artifacts office, not for prestige, but because he genuinely admired the ingenuity of non-magical people. "What exactly is the function of a rubber duck?" he once asked, with pure fascination. He wasn't mocking. He truly wanted to understand. He welcomed Harry into his home like a son, not once, not twice, every summer, every Christmas. When Dumbledore asked Arthur to accompany Harry to the ministry for his hearing, Arthur didn't hesitate. He risked his job at a time when the ministry was cracking down on dissenters, and when he was attacked by Nagini while guarding the Hall of Prophecies, Arthur nearly died. His survival wasn't just due to medical magic. It was the result of his strength, both magical and moral. Arthur didn't command armies or duel Death Eaters in grand spectacles, but he raised 7 children with integrity. He stood by Molly when others might have wavered, and when Percy abandoned the family, Arthur never stopped hoping he'd come back. "We're still his family," he told Molly quietly. That kind of forgiveness, that hope, it was rare in war. In a story where darkness loomed over every page, Arthur's light was subtle but constant. Number 15, Aberforth Dumbledore. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione apparated into Hogsmeade in the dead of night, chased by Death Eaters and hunted by magic that could trace them anywhere, it was not Albus Dumbledore who saved them. It was not the Order of the Phoenix, nor was it a guardian spirit conjured from love and memory. It was a gruff, bearded man with piercing blue eyes and the bitter scent of goat cheese about him. The sign above his head read, "The Hog's Head," and in that moment Aberforth Dumbledore stepped out of his brother's shadow and into the light of heroism. For much of the series, Aberforth is a name whispered more than spoken. When mentioned at all, it is usually in jest or disdain. In Order of the Phoenix, Mundungus Fletcher casually remarks that Aberforth was once involved in some scandal involving inappropriate charms on a goat. "Nice bloke, really," Mundungus mumbles, "except for the goats." And so, for years, Aberforth existed on the fringes of the fandom, little more than a background joke, the grumpy bartender of a dusty pub in Hogsmeade. But that all changed in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. It is there that Aberforth finally reveals himself, not just as a man with a painful past, but as someone who, despite his bitterness, chose to fight. A man who had suffered great losses and never truly forgiven, yet who still opened a secret passage to Hogwarts when all other doors were closed. When Harry confronts him in his pub, the truth starts to unfold. The portrait on Aberforth's wall, a painting of a solemn young woman with long dark hair, turns out to be Ariana Dumbledore, his sister, the girl whose tragic story shattered the Dumbledore family. Through that portrait, Ariana's painting communicates with another hidden portrait in Hogwarts, leading to the Room of Requirement. This secret passage becomes the only safe way for Harry and his friends to re-enter the castle, and Aberforth, the man long dismissed, becomes a gatekeeper of revolution. It's not the first time Aberforth acts to protect them. Earlier, when Harry sets off the caterwauling charm in Hogsmeade and Death Eaters close in like wolves, it is Aberforth who rescues the trio. In Deathly Hallows, chapter 28, we read, "He's the one who sent Dobby to the cellar," Harry said. "He got us out of Malfoy Manor. He saved our lives." Though Dobby the elf is remembered for the act, it was Aberforth who made it possible. There's a quiet strength to Aberforth, one forged in the aftermath of personal tragedy. As a boy, he watched helplessly as his sister Ariana was attacked by Muggle boys, an incident that changed her forever. Her magic turned inward, unstable and dangerous. Their father, Percival Dumbledore, retaliated and was sentenced to Azkaban, choosing silence over revealing Ariana's condition. Their mother, Kendra, raised the children alone until Ariana accidentally killed her during an outburst of uncontrolled magic. That left Albus, Aberforth, and Ariana, three broken pieces of a family that once dreamed of greatness. Aberforth resented Albus for prioritizing his ambitions over their sister's care. In Deathly Hallows, he bitterly recalls how Albus and Gellert Grindelwald dreamed of a new world order while Ariana needed them. Albus was always the favorite, Aberforth says, not that he ever noticed. The fight that ended their bond came swiftly and tragically. One summer evening, Albus, Aberforth, and Grindelwald argued in the Dumbledores' home. Wands were drawn, spells flew, and when the dust settled, Ariana was dead. No one knew whose curse had struck the fatal blow, not even Albus, not even Aberforth. That moment broke them both. Albus carried the guilt like chains, never able to speak of it, even to Harry. Aberforth, meanwhile, bore his grief like a wound that refused to heal. He returned to Hogsmeade, opened a pub, and distanced himself from everything, his brother, the wizarding world, and its wars. But as the final battle drew near, Aberforth chose to act, proving that bitterness is not the absence of courage. During the Battle of Hogwarts, Aberforth does more than open a passage. He fights. Side by side with students and teachers, he casts spells, protects the wounded, and defies Death Eaters. In Deathly Hallows, it is said that Aberforth was among the last defenders to remain on his feet when the Great Hall became a battlefield. His wand, though worn, blazed with furious light. This was not the man who hid behind a bar. This was a Dumbledore. The irony of Aberforth's life is how closely he mirrors his brother, yet how much he despises that reflection. Albus was lauded as the greatest wizard of the age. Aberforth, in contrast, was mocked for goat charms and sullen glances. But both were powerful, both were burdened by Ariana's death, and both, in the end, fought to protect the school that had defined their youth. Perhaps the most humanizing aspect of Aberforth is his honesty. When Harry praises Albus, Aberforth counters with brutal truth. He was a man, that's all, a man with a brain and a heart, and he got it wrong a lot too. It's a reminder that behind Albus's grand persona was a flawed man, a man Aberforth loved, hated, and could never quite forgive. And yet, despite their estrangement, Aberforth honors his brother's legacy in the most meaningful way by protecting Harry. He does not do it for the sake of a cause or for glory. He does it because it is right. That quiet, reluctant heroism defines him. When he tells Harry, "I've had enough of seeing people die for no reason," it isn't a speech. It's a confession from a man who has lost everything and still chooses to help. The portrait of Ariana in many ways is symbolic of Aberforth's soul, trapped, unable to leave the past behind, and only able to move through secret channels. She is the last link to a time before tragedy. Aberforth tends to her painting like one might tend a grave, ensuring her memory is never erased. It is Ariana who opens the path to Hogwarts. It is Ariana, even in death, who remains their guide. Number 16. Fleur Delacour. Of all the enchanting characters woven into the tapestry of J.K. Rowling's wizarding world, Fleur Delacour is perhaps among the most misunderstood. Often dismissed as merely a vision of beauty, a charming contestant from Beauxbatons Academy, Fleur's appearances in the films reduced her to an elegant ornament, lovely, ethereal, and forgettable. Yet the books reveal something strikingly different. Beneath the silvery hair and Vela glamour is a woman of resilience, loyalty, and quiet courage. Her story deserves far more than a passing glance. From the moment she enters the narrative in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, Fleur is set apart. Her confidence, her poise, and her pride are palpable. She is not afraid to speak her mind, even if her English is imperfect or her manner haughty. When Dumbledore announces the Triwizard Tournament, Fleur steps forward without hesitation. "I am wanting to compete in this tournament," she says, her chin lifted. This was not vanity, it was conviction. She was ready to represent her school and her country, and she was determined to prove herself. What many overlook is how Fleur, though glamorous, never relied on her beauty alone. Her performance in the tournament was not flawless, but it was marked by bravery and heart. In the second task, where the champions had to rescue someone dear to them from the depths of the Black Lake, Fleur's younger sister Gabrielle was placed in danger. Fleur struggled against the Grindylows and failed to complete the task, but her distress upon believing Gabrielle might be lost was genuine. "Ah, you saved her," she said tearfully to Harry, hugging her sister tightly. "Even though she was not your hostage." That moment peeled back the veil. Beneath her proud exterior was a loving sister, devastated at the thought of losing family. The real transformation in Fleur's journey comes in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince. After the tournament, she remained in Britain and fell in love with Bill Weasley. Many, including Molly Weasley and Ginny, could not take Fleur seriously. They found her annoying, superficial, and too dramatic. She was often the target of snide remarks and was referred to mockingly as phlegm by Ginny. Mrs. Weasley even hoped that Bill would tire of Fleur and find someone more suitable, like Tonks. The bias was clear. Fleur was too pretty, too foreign, too proud. But the world shattered on the night of Bill's attack. During the Battle of the Astronomy Tower, Bill is mauled by Fenrir Greyback, a brutal werewolf. His face is left horribly disfigured, and it's uncertain what lasting effects the attack might have. Everyone expects Fleur to recoil. To their surprise, she does not hesitate. "What do I care how he looks?" she snaps. "I am good-looking enough for both of us, I think." Her voice quivers, not with hesitation, but fury. "I will marry him whether he looks like he did or not." That declaration silences everyone. For perhaps the first time the Weasleys, Kidam and the readers, see the steel in Fleur's soul. That moment is no small thing. It is not just a defense of love, but a rebuttal of every shallow assumption ever made about her. She loves Bill not for his face, not for his family name, but for his spirit. She is not afraid of pain, of scars, or of the future. In the face of trauma, Fleur's commitment does not waver. She becomes more than a fiancée. She becomes a protector, a partner, a warrior. The wedding that follows in Deathly Hallows is a luminous chapter, both figuratively and literally. Fleur's beauty is, of course, dazzling. Described as looking like a princess, she radiates joy. But the event is not about her gown or her glamour. It is about unity in the face of darkness. The wedding, held at the Burrow, takes place under the looming shadow of Voldemort's rise to power. Fleur and Bill's decision to marry despite the war is, in itself, a brave act. She chooses not comfort or safety, but love, even as the world grows more dangerous. When the war breaks out in full force, Fleur does not retreat. She and Bill offer their home, Shell Cottage, as a refuge. This quiet act of rebellion is profoundly meaningful. Shell Cottage becomes a sanctuary for the wounded and hunted. It is where Dobby the house elf is buried. It is where Harry, Ron, Luna, Griphook, Dean and Ollivander find shelter after escaping Malfoy Manor. Fleur in these pages is not playing host, and she is risking everything. She knows that harbouring fugitives from the Ministry and the Death Eaters could bring doom upon her. But she stands firm. "You are safe here," she says to the battered group. And they are, because she makes it so. There is also a gentleness to her strength. She tends to Ollivander with care. She feeds the exhausted escapees. She comforts Luna. There are no grand speeches or flashy spells here, just unwavering kindness in a world gone mad. These are the deeds that define Fleur, not the tournament, not the wedding, not her Vila charm, but the quiet moments of care and risk performed without applause. Fleur's portrayal in the films, sadly, brushes over this complexity. She is rarely shown as more than a background character. Her grief, her courage, her fiery loyalty, all are lost in favour of aesthetic. It is a disservice to the character Rowling wrote, and to the many readers who found inspiration in Fleur's growth. It is easy to write off someone like Fleur. She's beautiful, confident, French, and therefore assumed to be shallow. But her arc demolishes this prejudice. She evolves not by discarding her femininity or beauty, but by deepening it with strength. Number 17, Narcissa Malfoy. Narcissa Malfoy rarely stands in the spotlight. Her name does not echo through the halls of Hogwarts with the same weight as Dumbledore, Snape, or even her own son, Draco. To many readers and viewers, she is simply the elegant, cold wife of Lucius Malfoy, a quiet presence in a house filled with louder ambitions and darker allegiances. But that impression is misleading. Hidden beneath her composed exterior lies one of the most pivotal and quietly courageous characters in the entire saga. From the first moment she appears in Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, Narcissa is cloaked in urgency and desperation. Her son has been given an impossible task, to kill Albus Dumbledore, and Voldemort has made it clear that failure is not an option. Accompanied by her sister Bellatrix Lestrange, Narcissa pays a visit to Severus Snape's home on Spinner's End. It's there that she pleads for a promise, a magical vow, to protect Draco. "You will help him," she demands. "You will watch over him as he attempts to fulfill the Dark Lord's wishes." And Snape, perhaps moved by guilt or calculation or something else entirely, agrees. The unbreakable vow. That moment reveals a crucial aspect of Narcissa's character. Unlike Bellatrix, who worships Voldemort with fanatical devotion, Narcissa is loyal only to her family. The war, the cause, the ideals, none of them matter to her in the face of a mother's fear. That fear does not weaken her, it strengthens her resolve. Her mission is not power or glory, it is the protection of her child, no matter the cost. J.K. Rowling could have written Narcissa as yet another proud, pure-blood supremacist, a silent extension of Lucius Malfoy's arrogance. But instead, she gave her something more potent, love that defies allegiance. Narcissa is no Death Eater. She may live among them, speak their language, attend their gatherings, but she never bears the mark. Her heart remains free, and that distinction becomes vital as the series draws to its end. The defining moment for Narcissa comes in Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows. The Battle of Hogwarts rages, Death Eaters and defenders of the school clash in a storm of spells and screams. The Dark Lord believes he has finally triumphed. In the Forbidden Forest, Voldemort strikes down Harry Potter with the killing curse, or so he thinks. As Harry lies silent on the forest floor, Narcissa is the one sent to check if he is truly dead. Not Bellatrix, not Lucius, not a loyal Death Eater, Narcissa. What happens next changes everything. She leans down, close to Harry's still face, her breath brushing his skin. In that moment, she sees a chance, not for power or favor, but for her son. "Is Draco alive?" she whispers. "The boy she carried, cradled, protected. The boy who was dragged into a war by the whims of men more powerful than him." Harry answers with a subtle nod. Yes, Draco is alive. That is all Narcissa needs. She turns to the Dark Lord and lies. He's dead. That lie reverberates like a spell of its own. With those 3 words, she changes the course of history. Harry survives because of her. The resistance inside the castle finds time to regroup and fight. Voldemort, believing himself victorious, drops his guard. And eventually, he falls. In that forest, Narcissa commits an act of extraordinary courage. She risks everything, her life, her family's position, the wrath of a merciless tyrant, to save her son. It is a maternal act, but it is also a deeply human one. She is not a warrior or a rebel, not a chosen one or a savior. She is a mother. And she is powerful because of that, not in spite of it. Readers often overlook the magnitude of this moment. In the films, it passes quickly, almost silently. But in the book, it is haunting. Rowling writes, "Narcissa Malfoy was perhaps the last person Harry had expected to show mercy, but he knew in that instant that she was not truly on Voldemort's side." That line draws a sharp line between allegiance and humanity. Narcissa does not switch sides, she simply chooses life. It is easy to celebrate characters who stand boldly against evil. Harry, Hermione, Neville, even Snape. But what about those whose bravery is quiet, whose heroism is not forged in battle, but in the aching silence of moral choice? Narcissa does not wear a Gryffindor crest. She does not fight on the front lines. But without her, the war would have ended differently. Perhaps it would not have ended at all. The irony is bitter and beautiful. Voldemort, who feared love more than death, is undone by it. Not just the love Harry's mother gave him as a baby, but the love Narcissa has for her child. Twice the Dark Lord fails to understand that love can be a weapon, and twice he is defeated because of it. This is what makes Narcissa such a complex character. She is not good in the traditional sense. She does not fight for justice or fairness. She stands with the wrong people for most of the series. But when the moment comes, she chooses mercy. She chooses humanity. That kind of redemption, soft, quiet, unseen, is rare in literature, especially in fantasy. Her relationship with her son is central to her identity. While Lucius becomes increasingly desperate and broken under Voldemort's rule, Narcissa remains composed. She does not crumble. She navigates the war with icy elegance, shielding her family as best she can. At Malfoy Manor, she tries to hide her horror when the prisoners are brought in. When Hermione is tortured, Narcissa does nothing, not out of cruelty, but paralysis. She is trapped, and she knows it. But even then she is watching, calculating, waiting. Number 18, Colin Creevey. Of all the faces that passed through the halls of Hogwarts, few were as easily dismissed, and yet so heartbreakingly heroic as Colin Creevey. To most readers, He was the excitable boy who couldn't seem to stop shouting Harry Potter's name or snapping pictures with his muggle camera. With his wide eyes, endless curiosity, and enthusiastic admiration, Colin seemed to represent the innocence and lightness that often punctuated the darker undertones of the wizarding world. But Colin was more than comic relief. His journey, though subtle, was one of the most poignant transformations in the entire Harry Potter series. From the moment he first appeared in Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, Colin Creevey was brimming with wonder. "All right, Harry, I'm Colin Creevey," he introduced himself breathlessly, snapping a photo before Harry could even respond. "I've read all about you. Everybody's told me about you. I'm in Gryffindor too." The camera hanging from his neck was more than a prop. It was a symbol of his wide-eyed hope and genuine desire to capture the magic of the world he had just entered. Colin was a Muggle-born, and for him, Hogwarts was more than a school, it was a miracle. His fascination with Harry was not born of obsession, but rather of sincere admiration. Colin came from a world where magic was myth. To discover not only that it was real, but that you were part of it, and then to meet the boy who had survived you-know-who, was, in Colin's eyes, akin to standing before a legend. His relentless awe might have seemed excessive, even embarrassing, but it was rooted in something pure, joy. In the same way that Luna Lovegood viewed the world through eyes filled with wonder, Colin saw magic everywhere, and he wanted to hold on to it frame by frame. But Colin's character quietly deepened with time. Though he never played a central role in Harry's inner circle, he remained loyal. When the Dumbledore's army was formed in Order of the Phoenix, Colin was quick to join, bringing along his younger brother Dennis. The DA wasn't just a club to him, it was a cause. In a world growing darker with every passing year, Colin Creevey chose to resist. Despite being one of the youngest members, he trained alongside students far older and more experienced. He didn't need to fight, but he did. It's easy to overlook Colin in the chaos of the final books. He wasn't at the forefront of the battles, and he never had a pivotal moment in the spotlight. But his absence in the 7th book was not because he had vanished into the background. As readers later learned, he had been forcibly removed from Hogwarts when Muggle-borns were no longer welcome. He was hunted, targeted, and rejected, not for what he had done, but for who he was. And yet he never gave up the fight. When the final battle for Hogwarts began, Colin made a choice that most adults wouldn't have dared. Despite being underage and officially barred from participation, he snuck back into the castle to join the defenders. He must have sneaked back. He must have known it was happening, Professor McGonagall said, her voice heavy with sorrow. He was always a brave boy. It is this moment, this quiet act of rebellion and courage, that defines Colin Creevey. He could have run, he could have hidden, he could have stayed with his family, safe and far from the bloodshed. But Colin returned to Hogwarts because he believed in it. He believed in Harry. And he believed that the fight against Voldemort was worth everything, even his own life. His loyalty, once seen as silly adoration, became an unshakable conviction. The image of Colin's body being carried out of the castle is one of the most devastating scenes in Deathly Hallows. It comes without flourish, without drama. It is not romanticized. It is simply there, quiet, shattering, and real. Neville nearly walked into Ginny as he hurtled toward the place where Colin Creevey lay, his eyes wide and blank. No final words, no last gasp of heroism, just silence. And perhaps that is what makes his death so tragic. It was uncelebrated. He died a hero's death, but received no hero's farewell. Colin's story is not one of grand gestures or dramatic showdowns. It is the story of a boy who loved something so deeply that he gave his life for it. His courage was not loud, but it was unbreakable. His loyalty was not shouted, but lived. He did not fight for glory, but for the simple belief that what was right should prevail. In many ways, Colin embodied the spirit of Gryffindor more than most. He wasn't a skilled duelist like Harry or a cunning strategist like Hermione. But he had bravery, the truest kind, the kind that comes from the heart, the kind that doesn't seek reward, the kind that gets overlooked because it's too quiet, too humble, too ordinary. Yet in the end, it was that very ordinariness that made his sacrifice extraordinary. His death is a reminder that war does not spare the young nor the innocent. It also reminds us that heroism isn't always wrapped in legend. Sometimes it is found in the unnoticed choices, the quiet defiance, the small, unwavering stand of someone who refuses to let evil win. Colin Creevey, once the laughingstock of Gryffindor, died with more courage than many seasoned wizards. There's something unbearably human about Colin's fate. He wasn't ready for war. He wasn't trained for it. He didn't have the skills of the Order or the power of the Chosen One, but he had heart. He had conviction. He had a fire in him that couldn't be extinguished, not even by fear. When the time came to choose between comfort and courage, Colin chose the latter, and he paid the ultimate price. His relationship with Harry was never symmetrical. Colin admired Harry from a distance, and Harry often responded with polite discomfort. But Harry's silence when he sees Colin's body speaks volumes. In that moment, it is clear that Harry recognizes the depth of the sacrifice made by the boy who once begged for a photograph, the boy who had idolized him, not because of fame, but because he saw in Harry the kind of hero he wanted to become. Colin Creevey, who had sneaked back into the castle and died in the battle, aged 16, Rowling wrote in the final book. The starkness of that sentence is haunting. There's no fanfare, no elaborate description, just the weight of a life cut short, a name in a list of the fallen, a name readers might forget unless they stop and remember what he truly stood for. In many ways, Colin's death is the emotional core of the Battle of Hogwarts. Fred's death was shocking. Lupin and Tonks broke our hearts, but Colin was innocence, optimism, and hope, struck down before he even had a chance to grow up. His death stripped away the illusion that bravery is reserved for the experienced. It showed that even the smallest among us could carry the heaviest burdens. If there is one image that lingers long after the final page is turned, it is the idea of Colin, camera still around his neck, eyes wide open, standing tall amidst the chaos, ready to defend the castle he loved, not because he was told to, not because he was forced to, but because he chose to. That's what makes him unforgettable. Colin Creevey wasn't just a footnote in Harry's story. He was a symbol of everything they were fighting for: the right to belong, the right to dream, the right to be part of a world that didn't see blood status as a sentence. He represented the new generation, born from wonder, raised in war, and lost to it before his time. Perhaps the saddest part is that he never got to see the world he helped save. He never saw Voldemort fall, never saw the peace restored, never saw the next generation of students enter Hogwarts under banners of safety. But maybe, in some small way, his presence lingers in every corner of the castle, in every photograph, in every story told about the brave ones who stood when they could have run. Colin's legacy is quiet. It doesn't scream, it whispers. It speaks to those who believe that courage isn't measured in size or age or strength, but in the choices we make when everything is on the line. And in that moment, on that night, Colin Creevey chose to be a hero. Not because he was ready, but because it was right. He may have died young, but Colin lived with a heart full of hope and a soul unwilling to surrender. And that is why he matters, not just in the story, but in the hearts of those who read it. He is a reminder that sometimes the smallest voices echo the loudest, and sometimes the boy behind the camera is the bravest of them all. Number 19, Charlie Weasley. Charlie Weasley, second eldest of the 7 red-haired siblings, a dragon tamer in Romania, a Hogwarts Quidditch captain, and a silent hero of the Second Wizarding War, exists almost as a myth. For readers who devoured the books, he was a flickering ember of adventure in the background, but for those whose knowledge came solely from the films, he was almost invisible. That omission is more than a loss, it's a disservice. Because Charlie Weasley might be one of the most fascinating wizards to ever walk the pages of J.K. Rowling's magical world. From the moment he was first mentioned in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Charlie's life shone with danger and freedom. Charlie's in Romania studying dragons, Ron tells Harry early on, a simple sentence that conjures a life most witches and wizards could only dream about. Dragons, the most fearsome magical creatures in the known world, classified as XXXXX by the Ministry, were Charlie's daily company. While his siblings immersed themselves in ministry work, shopkeeping, teaching, or professional fame, Charlie chose a different path: solitude, fire, and scale-covered friendship. This choice says more about his character than 100 lines of dialogue could. Charlie never chased recognition. He wasn't on magazine covers, he didn't give interviews, but he was the kind of man who saw a Hungarian horntail up close and reached for a harness instead of a wand. That in itself is a kind of bravery few can fathom. It's easy to charge into battle with a dozen friends. It's another thing entirely to face down a nesting dragon alone on a Romanian hillside with nothing but experience and instinct. Charlie's presence in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire is especially crucial, though rarely appreciated. When the Triwizard Tournament announced dragons would feature in its first task, it was Charlie who was contacted to bring them in. His expertise was so respected that he led the dragon-handling team that delivered the beasts to Hogwarts. Charlie's brought them, did you know? Hagrid tells Harry, grinning with admiration. Brought 4 of them over from Romania. That mission alone must have been a logistical nightmare, containing 4 aggressive territorial dragons and safely flying them across half of Europe. And yet, Charlie made it look easy, or at least manageable. It's no accident that Hagrid holds Charlie in such high regard. They shared a love of magical creatures, a disregard for personal safety, and a kind of rugged tenderness toward the misunderstood monsters of the magical world. Hagrid's description of Charlie always carried a tinge of pride, as though the boy had grown into everything Hagrid valued in a man. And Charlie's willingness to help with such a dangerous event, without demanding credit or recognition, reflects a quiet heroism that defines him throughout the series. Despite his brief appearances, Charlie's influence is felt across several key events. He's there during Bill and Fleur's wedding, helping prepare for the momentous and doomed celebration at the Burrow, and he returns when it matters most, for the Battle of Hogwarts. Though he arrives late in the night, he comes armed and ready, marching into a war zone without hesitation. Charlie came running into the room, Rowling writes, his red hair flying slightly singed. Even that detail, singed hair, tells us everything. Charlie had likely duelled his way through the grounds just to reach the castle. He was no stranger to heat or fire. For him, chaos was a familiar companion. But Charlie's most fascinating trait may be the life he didn't choose. Unlike his older brother Bill, who settled down with Fleur and took a job with Gringotts, or Percy, who chased status at the Ministry, or even Fred and George, who built a business empire, Charlie remained singularly focused. He never married. He never had children. He didn't seem to long for domesticity. His heart belonged to dragons, to wild spaces, to a world unburdened by routine. This wasn't out of loneliness, but purpose. Molly Weasley once remarked that Charlie could have been a great Quidditch player. He was that talented. But he gave it all up for the creatures he loved. Rowling herself confirmed this. When asked in interviews why Charlie never settled down, she explained, Charlie was more interested in dragons than women. That single sentence, casually said, opens 1,000 questions. Did Charlie fear connection, or was he simply too fulfilled to seek more? Was he broken in some way, or was he the only Weasley who found his true calling early and never wavered? In a world obsessed with pairing characters up, Charlie stood as a reminder that not everyone needs romance to lead a full, rich, dangerous life. It's also worth noting how close he remained to his family, despite the distance. In Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban, when the Weasleys visit Egypt, Charlie is right there in the photograph, his arms slung casually around Bill's shoulder. The photograph was magical, but so was the bond, enduring, light-hearted, forever connected. He might have lived among dragons, but his heart beat in time with the Burrow's kitchen clock. Even the photograph Harry saw at the beginning of Goblet of Fire is telling. In the photograph, Charlie was a lot shorter and stockier than Ron, who was tall and lanky, with a broad, good-natured face. He was holding a horned, snout-nosed creature with wings. The creature was probably a baby dragon, and even in a family snapshot, Charlie is cradling danger like it's a house cat. That image lingers, a man so comfortable with danger it becomes part of his silhouette. Charlie also played a critical, albeit understated, role in the Order of the Phoenix. While not stationed in Britain full-time, he helped organize resistance efforts from abroad. He coordinated with foreign wizards, sought reinforcements, and ensured the international magical community remained aware of Voldemort's rise. This was invisible work, thankless and unseen. But that's how Charlie operated. He was never the voice in front of the crowd. He was the hand passing wands behind the curtain. And there's something deeply romantic, that in the old tragic sense, about a man who chooses fire over fame. Charlie could have basked in glory. He had the talent, the pedigree, the looks. Instead, he walked the edge of the world, choosing companionship with winged beasts that could kill him in an instant. He reminds readers of the magical world's forgotten heroes, the ones who don't sit at the high table but still carry the weight of the war. He also brought an important dimension to the Weasley family itself. Without Charlie, the family dynamic might have tipped too heavily into domesticity. Each sibling had their archetype: the rebel twins, the golden boy Bill, the rule-follower Percy, the chosen Ginny, the loyal Ron. Charlie was the adventurer, the wanderer, the wild one. He represented the path not taken, a life of fire trails, dragon bones, windburned cheeks, and foreign skies. Every family needs a member like that. Someone who reminds them that life stretches far beyond the hedgerows of home. His absence from the films is especially painful for those who understood this. A scene between Charlie and Hagrid, reminiscing about Norbert E.A., could have been electric. A moment where Charlie hugs Molly goodbye before flying back to Romania would have reminded viewers that the war cost more than lives. It demanded time, distance, and sacrifice. But the movies left that out, and with it, they left out one of the bravest Weasleys to ever bear the name. Perhaps that's why Charlie feels like a ghost in the fandom. Not because he's forgettable, but because he lives on the edges. Too busy wrangling dragons to sit for a spotlight. He's the flame in the distance, the shape in the sky, the brother whose story was told only in fragments. But that's exactly why he's unforgettable. In the epilogue of Deathly Hallows, Charlie is conspicuously absent. No mention of his whereabouts, his fate, or whether he ever returned to England. But maybe that was the point. Maybe Charlie was never meant to settle. Maybe he's still out there, high in the Carpathians, whistling through scorched teeth as he calms a nesting longhorn. Maybe he visits the burrow once a year, smelling of smoke and sky, bringing stories so wild they don't seem real. And maybe, just maybe, Charlie Weasley is the kind of character who doesn't need 1,000 pages to make an impression, a few sentences, a few flickers of fire, and an eternal place in the hearts of those who understand that courage doesn't always look like a duel. Sometimes it looks like walking alone into a dragon's den and walking out with a smile. Number 20. Peeves. Of all the spirits that haunted the ancient halls of Hogwarts, none was louder, brighter, or more incorrigibly chaotic than Peeves the poltergeist. His very name stirred a mix of dread and grudging admiration among students and staff alike. Though completely absent from the film adaptations, Peeves was a fixture in the books, ever present in the background, shouting, cackling, singing, throwing things, and disrupting everything he could with boundless glee. Yet behind the veil of his anarchic energy was a surprising depth, revealed most poignantly in the darkest hours of Hogwarts history. Peeves was not, strictly speaking, a ghost. Ghosts were remnants of human lives, transparent echoes of once living witches and wizards. Peeves, on the other hand, had never been alive. He was a poltergeist, a creature of pure, magical mischief, born from chaos itself and sustained by disorder. No one quite knew how or when he had first appeared at Hogwarts, but by the time Harry Potter stepped foot inside the castle, Peeves had been a resident for centuries. He was as much a part of the school as the shifting staircases and the singing suits of armour. From his first appearance in Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, Peeves made his presence unforgettable. Peeves the poltergeist was bobbing along the corridor in mid-air, upside down and singing, the narration explains, as he hurls chalk at passing students. Even the ghosts couldn't tolerate him. Nearly Headless Nick, the ghost of Gryffindor House, often tried to avoid him. The Bloody Baron, Slytherin's terrifying and blood-stained spectre, was the only one who could keep Peeves in check. It was a well-known fact among students. If you ever saw the Bloody Baron drifting through the halls, Peeves would be nowhere to be found. The poltergeist's chaos was never random. Peeves had a wicked sense of humour and a keen awareness of people's weaknesses. He once dropped a bag of tarantulas on a class of first years, and on another occasion he barricaded the door to a history of magic lesson with enchanted dung bombs. Loony, loopy, Lupin, he once sang when Professor Lupin taught at the school. He had a song for every occasion and a personal vendetta against any figure of authority. When Dolores Umbridge tried to seize control of Hogwarts in Order of the Phoenix, Peeves delighted in her suffering. After Fred and George Weasley unleashed their swamp in the corridor, Peeves saluted them with uncharacteristic respect, perhaps the only time he ever acknowledged anyone with such dignity. Indeed, it was Fred and George who earned something close to his admiration. When they left Hogwarts in a blaze of rebellion, Peeves took their side with great enthusiasm. "Give her hell from us, Peeves," Fred cried as they mounted their broomsticks in Order of the Phoenix. The poltergeist did just that, throwing ink bottles, tipping desks, and hurling water balloons at the cruel, inquisitorial squad. Even Professor McGonagall was amused, murmuring, "It unscrews the other way," when she caught Peeves struggling to remove a chandelier. It was a rare moment of camaraderie, revealing how Peeves could serve the greater good when chaos aligned with justice. But Peeves's most unexpected and perhaps most heroic moment came during the climactic Battle of Hogwarts in Deathly Hallows. As the Death Eaters stormed the ancient castle, as spells sizzled through the air and walls crumbled, even Peeves joined the fight. Rowling doesn't devote long passages to his involvement, but in a brief and brilliant moment we glimpse him transformed, not in nature, but in purpose. He did what he had always done, threw things, shouted obscenities, created confusion, but now his targets were the invaders, the murderers, the Death Eaters. Peeves was zooming happily through the chaos, dropping chandeliers and vases onto the heads of Death Eaters and singing rude songs, Rowling writes. His war song, crude as it was, became a rallying cry for the defenders of Hogwarts. We did it, we bashed them, we Potters the one, and Voldy's gone mouldy, so now let's have fun. In these irreverent lyrics, the spirit of resistance was captured in its purest, silliest form. Peeves was not noble, not brave in the Gryffindor sense, not wise in the Ravenclaw way, but he was loyal to Hogwarts, to its spirit of freedom and magic. It is worth noting that Peeves did not act out of obligation. No one ordered him to help. In fact, he had resisted every rule and regulation that had ever been imposed on him. He had no ties to any house, no alliances, no loyalties, until now. In this chaotic stand for the school's survival, Peeves chose a side. That choice was profound. It meant that despite his constant mischief, he cared. He cared about the students, the teachers, the stones and stories of the castle. He was a product of its magic, and when the school was in peril, he rose in defense of it. Many readers have speculated what Peeves's scenes might have looked like on film. Had he been included, he might have added a layer of both comic relief and emotional resonance. Imagine him darting through smoke-filled corridors, hurling a grandfather clock at a stunned Death Eater, or swooping down to dump a cauldron of frog spawn over Lucius Malfoy's silver mane. He could have balanced the solemnity of the battle with the absurdity that defines Hogwarts, a place where even ghosts and poltergeists have hearts. The absence of Peeves in the movies is one of the great losses in the transition from page to screen. His omission wasn't for lack of trying. Rowling herself has mentioned that Rick Mayall filmed scenes as Peeves for the first movie, though they were ultimately cut. Mayall, with his manic energy and wild-eyed humour, would have been perfect for the role. Yet despite his absence, Peeves's spirit lives on in the books, as mischievous and memorable as ever. There is something uniquely magical about a character like Peeves. He doesn't fit neatly into any category. He's not a hero, not a villain, not even a background extra. He's a symbol of Hogwarts itself, unpredictable, magical, chaotic, and full of surprises. His existence reminds us that magic is not always serious, that sometimes the best defense against darkness is laughter, irreverence, and a well-aimed custard pie. Even in earlier books before the final battle, there were hints that Peeves could rise to the occasion. When Umbridge tried to dominate the school, Peeves's mischief escalated to a kind of rebellion. He unscrewed doorknobs, jammed keyholes with gum, set off dung bombs in her office, and serenaded her with mocking tunes. No spell or punishment could stop him. The students took comfort in his antics. He was the spirit of their defiance, the prankster king of the oppressed. Peeves was never bound by the rules of the castle. Argus Filch, the cantankerous caretaker, tried again and again to have him removed, to no avail. Even Dumbledore, with all his power, could not evict him. Peeves, he once said, is not like the ghosts. He's more of an independent agent. And indeed he was. That independence made him unpredictable, but it also gave him freedom to act when others were paralyzed by fear or indecision. In times of peace, Peeves was a nuisance. In times of tyranny, he was a thorn in the side of every would-be dictator. And in times of war, he became a weapon, wild, messy, and utterly effective. He was the kind of ally no one would ask for, and exactly the kind you'd want when all hell broke loose. One could argue that Peeves, in his own chaotic way, represented a kind of unfiltered truth. He didn't lie, he didn't pretend. He was exactly what he seemed, loud, rude, and uncontainable. But that honesty made him oddly trustworthy. He was consistent in his inconsistency. And in the world of Hogwarts, where people often wore masks and secrets lay beneath every floorboard, Peeves was refreshingly direct. In a castle filled with portraits, secrets, and shadows, Peeves danced through it all like a living contradiction. He was noise in a place of quiet study. He was mayhem in a place of order. He was a reminder that Hogwarts wasn't just a school, it was a living, breathing thing. And Peeves was its laugh, its howl, its echoing airborne raspberry. Would he ever admit to any of this? Certainly not. If anyone had thanked him for his help during the battle, he would have dropped a bucket of dragon dung on their head and zoomed off cackling. But the truth remains. Peeves defended his home. Not because he had to, not because anyone asked, but because deep down, under all the chaos, he cared. In the end, that's what makes him unforgettable. Peeves was the chaos that hid a cause, the trickster who chose to fight, the poltergeist who proved, when it mattered most, that even the most unruly spirit could stand for something, that even the wildest magic could choose the side of good, and that sometimes the loudest laugh in the room is the truest sign of love. Number 21, Andromeda Tonks. She stood by the window of a modest cottage, nestled somewhere on the edge of the English countryside, the sky outside bruised with shades of grey. Her hands, once soft and untouched by hardship, bore now the weathered traces of war and loss. Andromeda Tonks, born Black, had once belonged to one of the most powerful and feared pure-blood families in Wizarding Britain. But she had long severed that name from her identity. Not by mistake, not by accident, but by choice. Few people remembered that Bellatrix Lestrange and Narcissa Malfoy, two of the most infamous women of Voldemort's inner circle, had a sister. Fewer still knew that this third sister had once walked the same corridors of 12 Grimmauld Place, had heard the same sermons of blood purity, and had been raised beneath the same twisted family tree. "My parents were furious," Andromeda once admitted in a rare interview captured by Rita Skeeter years after the war. "But I had already made my choice long before I told them." That choice was Ted Tonks, a kind, brilliant, and fiercely principled man born of Muggle parents. Ted was everything Cygnus and Druella Black had taught their daughters to despise, but Andromeda saw not the blood in his veins, but the soul behind his smile. She met him at St. Mungo's during her training as a healer. He had come to visit a friend in the Janus Thicky ward. They had exchanged words, then laughter, then fire. It wasn't long before she returned home one day, placed her wand on the family table, and said simply, "I won't live under hate." She was disowned that very night. The Black family portrait burned her face from the tapestry. Sirius Black, her younger cousin, would later recall that moment with a mix of awe and grief. Andromeda was brave in a way few ever saw, he told Harry Potter once, eyes dark with memory. She gave up everything, title, gold, her name, for love. That's not weakness, that's strength. Andromeda's marriage to Ted was quiet but strong. They lived in a small but warm home, far from the opulence of her childhood. They planted lilacs by the porch and had Sunday breakfasts with homemade bread. When their daughter was born, Nymphadora, though she would later insist on being called simply Tonks, Andromeda held her close and whispered, "You are free, my little star, free to be whoever you want." There were no curses in this home, no talk of bloodlines, only lullabies and kindness. The years passed gently until the shadow of Lord Voldemort crept once more across the land. The war didn't knock on Andromeda's door, it smashed through it. Ted, ever the idealist, refused to register as a Muggle-born under the new ministry regulations. He went on the run. They didn't say goodbye. "If I stop to kiss you," he told her, "I won't leave." She stood in the doorway as he disappeared into the woods. Days later, his name appeared in the Daily Prophet, killed while fleeing. No funeral, no body. Just silence. It was a silence Andromeda would come to know too well. Her daughter Tonks, now married to Remus Lupin and pregnant with a son, had taken up arms as a member of the Order of the Phoenix. She had Ted's stubborn heart and her mother's fire. Andromeda had begged her not to fight. "For your child," she whispered, "just this once, choose safety." But Tonks smiled, that crooked smile that so mirrored her father's. "You didn't raise me to be quiet in the face of evil." The night Tonks died, Andromeda was watching the sky again. She knew before the news arrived. She felt it in her bones, in the air, in the crying of the wind. Tonks had fallen at the Battle of Hogwarts alongside her husband. Left behind was a newborn child, not yet a week old, a boy with blue hair and wide, curious eyes. Edward Remus Lupin, Teddy, they called him. Andromeda buried her grief in blankets and lullabies. At 64, she became a mother again. "She raised me when no one else could," Teddy would later write in his Hogwarts journal. "She never let me feel the weight of what I'd lost, only the strength of what I still had." Andromeda rarely spoke of the past, but sometimes at night she would sit by the fireplace with a faded photograph in her hands. It was taken on a summer day, Ted holding baby Tonks, her hair a shocking pink even then. Andromeda smiling in the background, her arms stained with garden soil. That was happiness. That was life. J.K. Rowling described Andromeda in one short sentence. "Andromeda resembles her sister Bellatrix, but her hair is lighter and her eyes kinder." That line, brief as it was, became the foundation of a quiet legacy. She could have chosen bitterness, she could have turned her back on a world that took everything, but she chose instead to be a rock, to be the last harbour for a child born of war. When Harry Potter came to visit Teddy as a godfather, he was struck by how calm and commanding Andromeda remained. "She's like Professor McGonagall," Ron once said, "but scarier when she's angry." And yet beneath that steely demeanour was a heart constantly mending, a woman who woke each day and chose love over despair. Not many remember that Andromeda attended the funerals alone, one for Ted, one for Tonks, one for Remus. She sat in the back pew, dressed in grey, hands folded, eyes closed. No one approached her, few even recognized her. She didn't need speeches or sympathy. Her mourning was her own. Andromeda's strength was never dramatic. She didn't duel Death Eaters in great halls or cast Patronuses across battlefields. Her magic was quieter, stronger, the kind of magic that refuses to give in to hate, the kind that sings lullabies in the dark, the kind that holds a child close and says, "You are not alone." Years later, when Teddy graduated from Hogwarts, he stood with Andromeda on the platform of King's Cross. She looked smaller then, wrapped in a violet shawl Tonks had once worn. He kissed her on the forehead. "You gave me everything," he whispered. And she replied, "And you gave me a reason to go on." It was Hermione Granger who once said, "Courage is doing what's right even when no one sees." Andromeda Tonks was never celebrated in wizarding portraits. She was never awarded medals or featured in the Daily Prophet's hero columns. But her legacy endured in the boy she raised, in the decisions she made, in the bloodline she refused to obey. In the Black family tree, scorched and cruel, her name had been burned away. But elsewhere, in a warm cottage where lilies bloomed in spring, her story lived on. Through bedtime tales of hope, through the laughter of a blue-haired boy, through quiet resilience. When asked by a young Hogwarts student years later if she regretted her choices, Andromeda smiled and answered simply, "My daughter died fighting for love, my husband died believing in kindness, and my grandson will grow in a world they helped create. No, I regret nothing." And so the tale of Andromeda Tonks is not one of spectacle, but of unwavering dignity. It is a lesson carved not in stone, but in daily acts of mercy. A sister who broke from her cursed lineage, a mother who endured the unthinkable, a grandmother who never gave up. She is the unsung heroine of the wizarding world, the woman who raised the last Lupin, the woman who stood alone, not in defeat, but in triumph. She remains to this day one of the truest examples of the power of quiet rebellion and the kind of love that asks for nothing in return, yet gives everything. Number 22. Ursula Black. Of all the forgotten names in the ancient halls of pure-blood wizardry, few whisper through time with as much quiet defiance as Ursula Black, great-grandmother to Sirius Black. Her name never appears in the pages of Rowling's books, nor does it pass through the lips of any character. Yet among the shadowed corners of number 12 Grimmauld Place and the brittle edges of the Black family tapestry, there lies a faint thread of her memory, a thread that, when followed, reveals a woman far ahead of her time. She was born in 1852 into the stern and stony embrace of the House of Black, a family famed for its fanatical dedication to the doctrine of blood purity. Her father, Pollux Black II, was a cruel traditionalist who once declared at a ministry gala that a wand in the hand of a Muggle-born is a sword in the hands of a monkey. From birth, Ursula was bathed in these ideas, groomed to believe in the superiority of her blood. But something inside her flickered, some spark of doubt that no charm or curse could extinguish. They said she was too curious, that she asked too many questions. When her brothers were learning how to curse house elves into silence, Ursula was in the attic, thumbing through Muggle novels she'd stolen from a squib relative. Jane Eyre, Frankenstein, the works of Charles Dickens. These weren't just forbidden within the Black household, they were blasphemy. "What do these stories have to offer us?" her father once thundered when he caught her reading. "They were not written by our kind." To which Ursula, only 12, calmly replied, "Maybe that's why they matter." She was never disowned, not openly. The Black family valued secrecy over spectacle, but she was gradually erased. Her face, once stitched into the family tapestry beside her betrothed, was charmed to fade into a blur. Her name was not burned like Sirius's, but quietly vanished. In family gatherings she was a ghost at the table, present in silence, ignored in every story. To the rest of the wizarding world she had simply moved abroad. In truth, she'd settled in a quiet village in Dorset, near the edge of Muggle society, married to a wizard named Edmund Vane, a man of half-blood descent with radical ideas of equality. It was in Dorset where Ursula made what some historians now call the first real fracture in the Black lineage. From her small, ivy-covered cottage, she began to host gatherings, quiet ones at first. Wizards, squibs, Muggle-borns, even a few brave Muggles themselves. Discussions were had, tea was served, ideas exchanged. Some say she once welcomed a young Bathilda Bagshot, fresh from her studies, and together they debated the ethics of wand legislation. It was a quiet revolution far from the prying eyes of her pure-blood kin. Yet her influence did not end in exile. From letters found in the archives of the Magical Historical Society, it's now known that Ursula maintained secret correspondence with her niece, Lucretia Black. One letter, dated 1889, reads, Never forget, dear one, that kindness is not weakness. The world will ask you to hate those who were not born like us. Say no if you can." That letter, scholars suggest, passed from hand to hand, eventually reaching a young Arcturus Black, the grandfather of Sirius, who never fully embraced the fanatical edge of his family, though he lacked the courage to oppose it. Sirius himself, long after breaking from his family's ideals, would later echo Ursula's spirit, though he likely never knew her name. "I hated the lot of them," he said in Order of the Phoenix. "My parents, with their pure-blood mania. I ran away from home when I was 16. That rebellion wasn't born from nothing. Somewhere in the tangled branches of the Black family tree, Ursula's descent had planted seeds. Seeds that would lie dormant for decades until Sirius watered them with rage, with grief, with love for the world beyond bloodlines. Even Regulus, who once embraced Voldemort's cause with youthful blindness, turned in the end. He came to believe Voldemort was doing terrible things, Kreacher told Harry. He wanted to stop him. What made a Black turn against Voldemort? What made a son of darkness seek redemption? Perhaps, as many believe, it was Ursula's legacy, a whisper passed down through half-spoken family tales, a myth of a woman who chose a different path. There's a story, half-truth, half-legend, told by an elderly witch in Knockturn Alley. She remembers, as a girl, being brought to a hidden meeting of witches in the 1920s. There, an ancient woman with silver hair and sharp eyes spoke of a time when blood will mean nothing, and the heart alone will matter. The woman never gave her name, but she wore a brooch in the shape of a black swan, the ancient symbol of the House of Black, altered with a silver tear. "She wasn't like the others," the witch said. "She spoke as if she carried a wound inside her, but she smiled like someone who'd survived it." The Black family, of course, did their best to stamp out this legacy. By the time Sirius was born, Ursula's name was a taboo. While Burger Black, Sirius's mother, tore down an old portrait from the attic when she found it humming with a charm meant to repel dark magic. "Too much light," she sneered, throwing it into the fire. But the portrait didn't burn, it glowed. Some say that same charm protected it, that it was a final spell cast by Ursula herself to defy oblivion. Remus Lupin once remarked that Sirius never stopped rebelling even when there was no one left to rebel against. But maybe that fire, that refusal to submit, was not rebellion at all, but inheritance. Ursula's gift passed down like a curse disguised as hope. There are no statues of Ursula Black, no books record her accomplishments, no chocolate frog card bears her name. And yet among those who seek the truth behind the myths, she is seen as the secret matriarch of a new Black legacy, a legacy of conscience, courage, and quiet revolution. In recent years, wizarding genealogists like Miranda Goshawk and Elias Rookwood have begun to re-examine family trees from the 19th century. One parchment, unearthed in the restricted section of the Hogwarts Library, lists an Ubi born in 1852 with a curious annotation in the margin, she who left the tree to plant her own. It is unsigned, but the ink matches that used by Phineas Nigellus Black during his time as headmaster. Even Harry, when he first explored the Black family home, sensed something different. The walls of Grimmauld Place were heavy with history, but one room, an upstairs study sealed with silver runes, seemed immune to the darkness. Hermione once theorized that this room had belonged to a Black who wasn't like the others. They found a shelf of Muggle books, a broken quill, and a faded diary with the initials UB burned into the cover. The pages were empty, magically erased perhaps, but one word remained on the inside flap: choice. In the Second Wizarding War, when the Order of the Phoenix rose again, its headquarters in Sirius's old house became a symbol of resistance. Few knew that the very bricks of number 12 had once held the spirit of a woman who chose the light long before it was safe. When Tonks, herself a descendant of the Black line, joined the Order, she did so not just in defiance of her blood, but in honor of it. "My mum always said there was good in the family if you looked hard enough," she told Molly Weasley. "I think she meant someone from a long time ago." Today, Ursula Black is spoken of in murmurs. In hidden classrooms where young witches and wizards debate the future, her story is passed along like contraband. She chose love over legacy, they say. She broke the chain. And while no wand traces her movements, no spell sings her name, her magic remains in every act of courage that dares to say no when tradition demands yes. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones that survive without a name. Ursula Black, the erased, the forgotten, lives not in records, but in resistance. Number 23, Argus Filch. Argus Filch stood in the shadows of the great hall, half hidden behind a heavy velvet curtain. The flickering light from the floating candles danced over his grey, wrinkled face, casting deep shadows into the furrows of his brow. It was the Yule Ball of 1994, and laughter spilled into the hallways like honeyed poison. Students twirled in enchanted robes, their eyes bright with youthful enchantment. Music floated in the air, and not one soul noticed the man in the shadows, except perhaps for Mrs. Norris, who rubbed against his leg with a raspy purr. He didn't belong in that world. He never had. Born into a magical family but lacking the gift of magic, Argus was what the wizarding world called a squib. The word itself stung like a slap, harsh, short, dismissive. As a boy he had dreamed of being sorted by the sorting hat, of casting spells, of flying on a broomstick, but no Hogwarts letter came. And when he finally did arrive at the school, it wasn't as a student, but as its caretaker, a permanent outsider watching others live the life he had been denied. It was easy for the students to mock him. "Filch," they sneered in the corridors, "is worse than Peeves." And perhaps they weren't wrong. He was bitter, suspicious, always ready to pounce. But what they failed to see was the pain behind his eyes, the years of frustration built up inside a man who had spent decades watching children discover powers he would never have. As Ron Weasley once blurted in anger, "He's just a squib, don't you? What can he do?" Those words had lingered with Filch, slicing deeper than the speaker could ever have guessed. He had tried once to change his fate. Buried deep in his tiny office was a stack of pamphlets from a company called Quickspell. A correspondence course in beginner's magic for squibs, they promised. Harry Potter had once glimpsed one such letter when he stumbled into Filch's office in his second year. The caretaker's reaction had been explosive, but beneath the rage was something far more vulnerable: shame. That fragile hope of becoming more than he was, dashed again. The truth is, Filch's presence at Hogwarts wasn't just out of necessity. He could have left. He could have hidden from the world that reminded him daily of his inadequacy, but he didn't. He stayed. He watched. He cleaned the corridors, mopped up blood and puke, chased down rule-breakers, and fought to keep the school safe, in his own way. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, during Dumbledore's funeral, Filch could be seen standing silently at the back, his eyes glistening. For all his faults, he loved the school, and it loved him in its own way. Albus Dumbledore, who saw the best in everyone, never dismissed Filch, never mocked his lack of magic. He gave him duties, responsibilities, and, most importantly, trust. "Everyone matters," Dumbledore had once said, and he meant it. Filch was a part of Hogwarts, an essential part. yet he was never truly welcome. The students, from Gryffindor to Slytherin, treated him with disdain. Fred and George Weasley turned him into the butt of countless jokes. Peeves, the poltergeist, tormented him relentlessly. "Won't Filchy Wilchy come and catch us now?" The ghost would taunt, hurling ink bottles and suit armor at the poor man. The irony, of course, was that Peeves feared only two people in the entire castle, the Bloody Baron and Argus Filch. Why Filch? Because even a spirit like Peeves could sense that beneath the caretaker's bitter exterior burned a core of stubborn resilience. Filch could not cast a single spell, yet he faced ghosts, enchanted creatures, and even Death Eaters during the Battle of Hogwarts. He fought not with a wand, but with sheer will. Mrs. Norris was his only constant, a thin, skeletal cat with lamp-like eyes and a knowing glare. She was more than a pet. She was his companion, his shadow, and perhaps the only creature that understood his loneliness. "That cat of his, it's got it in for us," Ron once whispered, but he didn't know. None of them did. That cat was the closest thing Filch had to family. During the Chamber of Secrets incident, it was Mrs. Norris who was first attacked, found hanging, petrified, in a hallway. Filch's scream had been one of pure anguish. "Enemies of the air, beware," was scrawled on the wall, but all he saw was his beloved companion, lifeless. He blamed Harry, he blamed everyone, but it wasn't anger, it was despair. And yet Filch stayed. Year after year, he watched students come and go. He saw brilliant witches and wizards grow into heroes and others fall into ruin. He saw the rise of Voldemort and the fear that gripped the halls. He saw friends die, and still he stayed, cleaning, watching, protecting. In Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, when Voldemort's army breached Hogwarts, Filch was there. Amidst the flying curses, shattered stone and screaming children, he was seen dragging wounded students to safety. No wand in hand, no shield charm to protect him, just raw, human determination. Minerva McGonagall once told him sharply, "Mr. Filch, you are not a young man." But he ignored her. He always did when it came to protecting the school. He was too old, too tired, and too human. But he stayed. Some would say he was a bitter man, and perhaps he was. But bitterness was not the whole of him. He had dreams once. He had wanted to be more. He had wanted to matter. And in his own quiet way, he did. There is something profoundly tragic about Argus Filch, not because he was powerless, but because he was surrounded by power and reminded of his lack every single day. It's easy to admire Dumbledore's wisdom, Snape's bravery, or Harry's heroism. But what about the silent courage of a man who wakes up every morning in a world that never loved him, chooses to serve it anyway? One can imagine Filch, late at night, walking the dark corridors with a lantern in hand. The portraits whisper as he passes, the ghosts float silently above, and Mrs. Norris, ever faithful, slinks behind him. The castle breathes around him, alive, magical, pulsing with spells he cannot perform. But he walks on. It was said that after the war, when Hogwarts began to rebuild, Filch resumed his post without question. No one asked him to, no one thanked him. He simply arrived with mop in hand, eyes tired but determined, because that was his home. Hogwarts, for all its cruelty, was the only place that had ever given him a purpose. And yet the letters from Quickspell remained hidden in his drawer. Perhaps he still believed. Perhaps in the quiet moments he'd read the pamphlets again, tracing the words with shaking fingers, daring to imagine. You too can master simple spells in weeks, it had promised. A lie, perhaps, but it was his lie. And lies, when believed long enough, can become comforts. Years from now, students will pass through Hogwarts without ever knowing his name. They'll marvel at the magic, speak of legends, and forget the man who scrubbed their messes. But the stones will remember, the floorboards he walked, the portraits he argued with, the secrets he kept. They will remember. Because Argus Filch, the squib, the caretaker, the joke, was more than he seemed. He was a symbol of loyalty, of quiet suffering, and of the kind of bravery that never makes the history books. And somewhere, in the bowels of the castle, his mop still leans against a wall, his lantern still flickers, and if you listen closely, you might just hear the faint padding of paws in the dark, and the tired footsteps of a man who never stopped walking. Number 24, Seamus Finnigan. Of all the students who walked the corridors of Hogwarts, few underwent such a quiet but profound transformation as Seamus Finnigan. While often remembered for his comic misfires in Charms class, "I swear, Professor, I followed the instructions exactly. It must be the wand." There lies beneath the smoke and sparks a story of self-discovery, internal conflict, and ultimately, bravery. Seamus is one of those characters whose journey mirrors the hidden struggles many face. Between family loyalty and truth, fear and courage, pride and humility. He began his Hogwarts years as part of Harry Potter's inner circle, though more of a satellite than a core member. He shared a dormitory in Gryffindor Tower with Harry, Ron, Neville and Dean, and was often portrayed as cheerful and light-hearted. But while others like Ron and Hermione were ready to follow Harry through fire, Seamus was more hesitant, more cautious, and that caution would one day erupt into confrontation. The real turning point for Seamus comes in Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix, when Harry returns to Hogwarts after witnessing the rebirth of Lord Voldemort. The Ministry of Magic, led by the stubborn and willfully blind Cornelius Fudge, denies Voldemort's return and launches a smear campaign against Harry and Dumbledore. This propaganda seeps into the homes of wizarding families, and Seamus is not immune. One evening, as Harry is unpacking in the Gryffindor dormitory, Seamus confronts him. "My mam didn't want me to come back this year," he says. "She said it's too dangerous." Harry, taken aback, tries to explain, but Seamus cuts him off. "You're mad, and Dumbledore's even madder. My mam says so." It's a pivotal moment, because up until then, Gryffindor had largely been united in support of Harry. Seamus's words sting, not just for their content, but because they reveal how the lies of the Ministry can divide even close quarters like a shared dormitory. The argument escalates, with Harry shouting, "Well, if you think I'm a liar, you can bugger off." The dorm room falls silent. The damage is done. This confrontation is not just a petty schoolboy squabble. It's a mirror of the larger war brewing beyond the castle walls. Seamus's mother, like many in the wizarding world, chooses to believe what is convenient and comfortable. She represents a majority that prefers not to face difficult truths. Seamus, caught between his mother's fears and the reality unfolding before his eyes, lashes out. It's a portrait of a young man torn between two worlds, home and school, loyalty and reason. But what makes Seamus's arc memorable is that he doesn't stay there. He doesn't linger in denial or wallow in pride. Over time, and especially after witnessing Umbridge's tyrannical rule and the formation of Dumbledore's army, DA, he begins to shift. Though he doesn't join the DA immediately, the seeds of doubt have been sown. When he finally does join, it's not with fanfare, but with a quiet admission of regret. In Harry Potter and the Half-Blood Prince, he becomes more involved, more engaged, and by the final book, Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows, he returns to Hogwarts and stands on the front lines. What's particularly touching is how Seamus, once ashamed of Harry and wary of Dumbledore, becomes a defender of both. During the Battle of Hogwarts, Seamus fights not as a comic sidekick, but as a true Gryffindor, courageous, loyal, and unyielding. In fact, he plays a vital role during the final stand. When Professor McGonagall orders the destruction of the wooden bridge to slow down Voldemort's forces, she turns to Seamus. "I assume you can handle this, Mr. Finnigan?" she says, almost with a smile. "Boom," he replies, and for once the explosion is not a joke, but a calculated, heroic act. He uses his infamous knack for blowing things up to save lives. There's poetic justice in that moment. The very trait that once made him the butt of jokes becomes his greatest strength. Throughout the series, Seamus was the one who couldn't control his spells, who always added too much gunpowder, metaphorically speaking. But when the moment comes, he channels it with purpose. He chooses bravery not because he's fearless, but because he's grown. Seamus's friendship with Dean Thomas is another subtle but powerful thread. Dean stands by Harry from the beginning, while Seamus wavers. That tension creates a rift between the two boys, one that is never dramatically resolved but quietly mended. By the final battle, they stand side by side again. It's a reminder that forgiveness often comes in actions, not words. In the Deathly Hallows, we see Seamus among the group of students who remain at Hogwarts under the oppressive rule of the Carrows. Along with Neville and Ginny, Seamus becomes part of the internal resistance. He suffers beatings, hunger, and constant surveillance. In one scene, when Harry returns to the room of requirement, Seamus's appearance shocks him. "He looked like he had been punched repeatedly in the face," Rowling writes. His courage is written not in grand speeches, but in bruises and quiet endurance. This is the same boy who once said, "My mum doesn't think you're telling the truth." Now he fights against the very system his mother supported. That shift is significant. Seamus's growth isn't just personal, it's ideological. He stops echoing the voices of authority and starts thinking for himself. And in doing so, he earns his place in the story, not as a background character, but as a symbol of transformation. Seamus also reflects a broader theme in the series, that not all heroes are born certain. Some must stumble through doubt, wrestle with fear, and choose their path more than once. His journey is less glamorous than Harry's, less tragic than Snape's, but no less meaningful. He is the ordinary student who chooses the hard road, and that makes him extraordinary. Even in the heat of battle, Seamus retains his humour. When Harry is searching for Ravenclaw's diadem, he passes Seamus fighting alongside Lavender Brown. "Got a light?" Seamus jokes, brandishing his wand. In the middle of war, his spirit endures, its humour not as mockery, but as resistance, an affirmation of life in the face of death. Rowling never gives Seamus a long monologue or a dramatic scene of redemption. Instead, she lets his actions speak. From the boy who doubted Harry, he becomes the young man who defends him with his life. And perhaps that's the most realistic arc of all, because real people often don't get neat redemptions. They simply grow quietly and steadily until one day they're unrecognizable from who they were. Seamus also stands as a reflection of how Hogwarts itself evolves. The school is not just a place of learning, but a crucible of character. Seamus, like so many others, enters it as a child and leaves it forged in fire. And though he never seeks the spotlight, his bravery is no less brilliant for being shared. In the films, unfortunately, much of Seamus's development is trimmed or relegated to background. He's mostly remembered for his exploding cauldrons and exasperated looks, but the books reveal a layered, human character, one who changes his mind, admits his faults, and fights for what he believes in. And that's not comic relief, that's character. The moment Seamus helps blow the bridge is more than a tactical move, it's symbolic. He's destroying not just a path for the enemy, but the last remnants of his old self, cautious, fearful, compliant. What remains is pure Gryffindor fire. He doesn't just follow orders, he acts with conviction. His story also invites reflection on how belief is formed. Seamus believed the ministry because that was the voice of authority. It took evidence, experience, and pain for him to reshape his beliefs. In today's world, where misinformation can spread like wildfire, Seamus's arc is more relevant than ever. He teaches us that changing your mind isn't weakness, it's growth. And so by the end of the war, Seamus is no longer the comic relief in the corner. He is a fighter, a friend, a Gryffindor in every sense. In the final image of the battle, when survivors gather in the Great Hall, bloodied and exhausted, you can imagine Seamus among them, not smiling for once, but solemn, proud, and forever changed. He may never be a headline name in the Harry Potter saga, but his story is a vital thread in the tapestry. Seamus Finnigan, the boy who once blew up everything he touched, learned to channel that explosion into something greater: courage, defiance, and light. Number 25, Madame Hooch, Madame Rolanda. Hooch first swooped into the narrative of Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone like a hawk on the hunt, quite literally. With hawk-yellow eyes and short, spiky grey hair, she was one of the earliest adult figures the first years encountered at Hogwarts. While many remember her solely as the referee during Quidditch matches, her role, though brief in appearances, was far more significant than often acknowledged. She was the first teacher to introduce Harry to the skies, the first to put a broom in his hand and to witness that astonishing moment when a boy who had never flown before soared into the air like he had been born to do it. It was Madame Hooch who shouted, "Up!" and watched with a glint of pride as Harry's broomstick responded instantly to his call. It was during that first flying lesson that the seeds of Harry's identity were sown, not just as a wizard, but as a seeker. This wasn't just any school subject. Flying was dangerous, rebellious, and thrilling. Madame Hooch's task was to control a dozen wide-eyed 11-year-olds who had never left the ground without the assistance of a staircase. The importance of that responsibility is often overlooked. One wrong movement, one uncontrolled broom, and a student could easily be injured. In fact, Neville Longbottom provided a vivid example of the risks involved when he lost control and broke his wrist, prompting Madame Hooch to escort him to the hospital wing. That left the class unattended, which in turn set the stage for Harry's first moment of greatness, catching Neville's Remembrall in a daring mid-air dive. But none of it would have happened without Madame Hooch's initial guidance. Her sternness was not cruelty. It was a shield against chaos. "Stick your right hand over your broom," she commanded during that very first lesson, "and say, 'Up.'" There was authority in her voice, an echo of command forged from years of ensuring young witches and wizards didn't plunge to their deaths. She was not someone who needed to shout to be feared. Her control was quiet, firm, and earned. In a school where ghosts roamed corridors, monsters lived in basements, and potions could boil your eyebrows off, Madame Hooch was a rare island of sensible discipline. Her job was to teach children how to defy gravity and live. There is a strange injustice in the way the series quietly forgets her. She vanishes from the story almost completely after the first book, despite playing an integral part in introducing the reader and Harry to Quidditch. That first match, where she acted as referee, was more than a game. It was a declaration. For Harry, it was the moment when he felt he truly belonged at Hogwarts. "He's got the snitch!" shouted Lee Jordan. But before that, it was Madame Hooch who blew the whistle, released the balls, and signaled the start of something much bigger than a game. She was the conductor of that moment. She was the one who knew how much it mattered. It's easy to forget that Hogwarts wasn't only a place of learning, it was a place of transformation. The teachers weren't just educators, they were the guardians of these transformations. McGonagall pushed Harry into becoming a seeker, yes, but it was Hooch who prepared him for it. How many students over the years learned to fly under her watchful eye? How many found courage in her clipped words and steady gaze? Flying was more than sport. It was a rite of passage. It separated the magical from the mundane. And Madame Hooch was the gatekeeper. Her absence from later books is not just a narrative oversight, it's a loss, because she wasn't just a referee with a whistle. She represented something more primal in the world of Hogwarts. She symbolized freedom, risk, and discipline, all entwined in one lean, sharp-eyed figure. It's curious how she wasn't included in later major battles. Surely someone with her strength, her precision, would have been a formidable force. And yet, not a word of her during the Battle of Hogwarts. Not a whisper. Where was she? Did she stand at the castle gates, broom in hand, ready to protect her students? The story doesn't say. But it should have. Even when she did appear, her character was never expanded. We never learned of her background, of her days before Hogwarts. Did she compete professionally? Was she once a famous seeker? Did she lose someone in a Quidditch accident that made her so protective of her students? Her sternness hinted at a past, at stories left untold. In a castle full of legends, she was one of the few teachers we never got to know. And yet she mattered. Every time a broom lifted off the ground, every time a student found their balance in the air, it was because of her. Harry never forgot his first flight, and he shouldn't have. That first moment of flight was one of pure joy, pure magic. It was better than riding a broomstick, better than winning at Quidditch. He'd never felt so alive. And it was Madame Hooch who had made it happen. No one else. She handed him the broom. She gave the command. She believed in what she saw when others hadn't even looked. There's a quiet kind of heroism in that. Not the flashy, wand-blazing heroism of duels and dragons, but the everyday kind. The kind where you show up every day and teach something dangerous to children, not just safely, but meaningfully. She didn't wear cloaks embroidered with stars or deliver stirring speeches. She didn't need to. Her strength was in her steadiness, in her eyes, which missed nothing, in her voice, which brooked no argument. And she was fair. Oh, how rare fairness is in Hogwarts. In a school where favoritism often shaped destinies, Madame Hooch treated every student equally. Whether you were a pureblood like Draco Malfoy or a muggle-born like Hermione Granger, on the pitch you were just a flyer. No better, no worse. Just a young person trying to learn how to control a broom and not die. That kind of neutrality in a world torn by bloodlines and power struggles is a kind of quiet rebellion, and it deserves to be honored. Her name, Rolanda, was rarely mentioned, and yet it carries with it a weight. It's a name that suggests strength, resolve, and perhaps a past that she chose not to share. She was always alone, never shown to have friends among the staff. Was that by choice? Was she simply someone who preferred the skies to the company of others? Or was she hurt once, long ago, and chose the wind over companionship? We'll never know, but it's easy to imagine her, years ago, soaring through the clouds, heartbroken but free. Even Filch got more backstory, even Trelawney had her moment of prophecy. But Madame Hooch remained a mystery. And perhaps that's what makes her compelling. She existed on the edge of the story, much like she existed on the edge of the Quidditch pitch, watchful, poised, ready to intervene when needed, and when not needed, fading silently into the background. She never demanded attention. She just did her job flawlessly. And for Harry that mattered. That first moment on a broom, that thrill, that instinctive bond between wizard and heir. Madame Hooch witnessed it first, not Dumbledore, not McGonagall, not even Ron or Hermione. She was there. She saw him, and she didn't stop him. In fact, when McGonagall asked her if Harry could play on the team despite being a first year, she didn't argue, she didn't try to take credit. She simply stepped back and let destiny unfold. There's dignity in that, a kind of wisdom in knowing when to let go. It makes you wonder, how many other students did she spot over the years who had that same spark? Did she feel pride watching Cedric Diggory fly? Did she mourn quietly when he died? Did she curse under her breath when she saw the name Harry Potter again and again in the hospital wing, bruised from another match? Or did she simply sigh, knowing he would never stop chasing the wind? The books, for all their detail, missed an opportunity in Madame Hooch. She could have been the voice of calm during the storm. She could have trained Dumbledore's army in aerial combat. She could have led students into the sky during the final battle, using her expertise to outmaneuver Death Eaters. But she was forgotten. A footnote in a saga she helped launch. And yet she endures in memory. Readers remember her. Maybe because she was the first adult to offer Harry something joyful. Maybe because she was one of the few who seemed to take no sides. Or maybe because she reminded us all that some heroes don't need prophecies or Horcruxes or chosen destinies. Some just need a broom, a voice that says up, and the strength to guide others without ever asking for thanks. So here's to Madame Hooch, the wind in her hair, the pitch beneath her boots, the whistle between her lips. She may not have battled Dark Lords or solved ancient riddles, but she helped children fly. And in a world full of darkness, what could be more magical than that? Number 26, Dedalus Diggle. No one took Dedalus Diggle seriously, not at first. With his purple top hat that shimmered like a second moon, and his over-the-top bows whenever someone mentioned Harry Potter's name, Diggle was easy to dismiss as comic relief in a world that had little patience for eccentrics. Yet beneath the sparkle and spectacle was a man of deep conviction, unwavering courage, and quiet sacrifice. In a war where heroes often wore stoic expressions and brandished wands like swords, Diggle smiled, and still fought. Harry first encountered him, albeit unknowingly, at a very young age. "I saw you once, you know," Diggle beamed when they were formally introduced at the Leaky Cauldron. "You bowed to me once in a shop." Harry blinked. He remembered the incident, the strange little man with the twinkling hat, bowing so low his nose nearly touched the pavement. At the time, he thought it was just another adult being odd. In truth, it was a member of the Order of the Phoenix, bowing not in mockery, but in reverence for the boy who lived. Diggle had been one of the watchful eyes silently guarding Harry in his early years. Dumbledore had ordered it, of course, not that the Dursleys ever noticed. To them, strange people in cloaks might as well have been Jehovah's Witnesses or travelling magicians. But Diggle kept vigil. He was stationed at a safe distance, sometimes watching from across the road, other times from a bench in the nearby park with a newspaper, usually upside down, shielding his face. He was part of the silent circle of protectors, unsung and unseen. During the summer of 1991, when Quirrell had already begun plotting his first move under Voldemort's influence, Diggle stood watch longer hours than ever. He recorded the unusual, Dudley's tantrums, Harry's odd punishments, and the cold disdain with which the Dursleys treated their nephew. There were times Diggle wanted to act, to intervene, to march up to the door and take Harry away himself. But orders were orders. He remained a shadow, whimsical, overlooked, but constant. His first major mission came in 1995 during the second rise of Voldemort. When the Order was reassembled, Diggle was one of the first to answer Dumbledore's call. No hesitation, no questions. He walked into the dusty headquarters at 12 Grimmauld Place with a bow and a joke, as always, but also with a mind sharpened by years of preparation. Dedalus, of course, said Dumbledore at the first meeting. "He's kept the watch longer than most." Though rarely in the spotlight, Diggle's contributions were critical. He served as a courier between Order outposts in Kent and Surrey, often apparating several times a day, dodging Death Eater patrols and charms designed to detect magical movement. Once, while disguised as a Muggle postman, he narrowly escaped capture when Yaxley and Mulciber raided a post office rumoured to be an Order checkpoint. He left behind only a paper trail, a stack of unposted letters and a single purple feather. But perhaps his most dangerous role came in 1997 after Voldemort took over the Ministry. Harry had just turned 17. The Order launched Operation 7 Potters to safely extract him from Privet Drive. It was chaos. 6 decoys, all polyjuiced into Harry, flying on broomsticks, thestrals, and Hagrid's enchanted motorcycle. Diggle was paired with Hestia Jones. They took one of the less obvious routes, veering north through thick forest and flying low over abandoned roads. "We were almost hit by a killing curse," Hestia later told Kingsley. "But Dedalus, he spun mid-air and threw up a shield charm so fast it cracked his wand in half. Saved us both. They made it to safety." "Barely." Diggle collapsed the moment they arrived at the Tonks house, his hat singed, robes torn, and hands shaking. But he smiled. "Didn't spill a drop of tea," he joked, holding up a flask that no one realized he'd been carrying the entire time. When the Order began relocating Muggle-borns and endangered families, Diggle volunteered again. This time, with Hestia at his side, he was tasked with escorting the Dursleys to safety. It was not the sort of mission others fought over. The Dursleys were, and after all, not only Muggles, but proud of their ignorance. Still, Diggle treated the task with the same gravity he would have shown protecting the Minister himself. "It's Harry's family," he told Hestia. "Like them or not, their blood matters." Vernon Dursley didn't make it easy. He insulted Diggle's hat, called him a clown in a circus. Petunia muttered about lunatics under her breath. Dudley looked scared but kept quiet. But Diggle, ever polite, simply tipped his hat and responded, "Better a clown in a circus than a corpse in a cage." Vernon went quiet after that. They transported the Dursleys to a safe house in Devon. The location was enchanted, unplottable, and only a few in the Order knew its coordinates. Diggle and Hestia stayed with them for weeks. It was there, isolated in a cottage surrounded by fields and protective charms, that something unexpected happened. Dudley changed, slowly. He began asking questions. "Are all wizards like you?" he asked Diggle one night. Diggle laughed. "Merlin, no. Most don't dress nearly as well." It broke the ice. Diggle taught Dudley to play wizard's chess using a spare set he'd brought for amusement. Vernon refused to touch the pieces, convinced they were cursed. Petunia spent most of her time reading old cookbooks she brought from home. But Dudley played, and even smiled when he lost. Once he asked Diggle why he did it, why he protected a family that had never shown gratitude. Diggle paused and said, "Because kindness isn't a currency. You don't spend it only where it's returned." After Voldemort's fall, Diggle faded from public memory. There were no medals, no stories in the Daily Prophet. He returned to his modest flat in Lower Croydon, hung his hat on the same rack he'd used for 30 years, and went back to tending his garden of self-watering orchids. He never boasted. He never asked for recognition. But those who knew, Harry, Hestia, Kingsley, even Dudley, remembered. Harry once mentioned Diggle to Ron and Hermione during a quiet evening at the Burrow. "He always acted like a joke," Harry said, "but he never ran. Not once." Hermione smiled. Sometimes the loudest hearts beat under the silliest hats. Diggle's story is a reminder of the invisible scaffolding that held up the resistance. Not all heroes rode dragons or wielded elder wands. Some wore shimmering hats and told bad jokes in tense moments. Some stood guard without thanks. Some taught decency through games of chess with a boy who once called his cousin a freak. In the second edition of The Rise of the Phoenix, a chronicle of the Order, published years after the war, a chapter was quietly dedicated to Diggle. It bore no title. Just a quote. He never stopped smiling, not even when the sky fell. The author, Elphias Doge, had written it in memory of a friend few had taken seriously, but who had taken everything seriously when it mattered. Today, a small bench in Godric's Hollow bears his name. Tourists rarely notice it. It has no grand design, just a purple top hat carved into the wood and a plaque that reads, "To those who smiled while they stood watch." Diggle never asked to be remembered, but he is. In the pages of old Order records, in the stories Hestia still tells, and in the memory of a boy who once saw a stranger bow to him on a street, not knowing that bow was a promise, a vow of protection, of hope, of love from a world he hadn't yet entered. And when Harry walks by that bench in Godric's Hollow, when the wind stirs the leaves just right, he swears he can hear a voice saying, "You're taller than I imagined, Harry, but the scar's still there, I see. Good lad, good lad." Number 27. Madame Irma Pince. Of all the silent sentinels who walked the hallowed halls of Hogwarts, few were as enigmatic as Madame Irma Pince. She was not a professor nor a head of house. She did not duel Death Eaters or ride Thestrals into battle, yet she was one of the most vital guardians of the ancient school. Not of its students, nor its stone towers, but of its knowledge. For deep in the heart of Hogwarts, beneath vaulted ceilings and between endless rows of shelves, Madame Pince watched over the library like a hawk, or, as Ron once whispered, like an underfed vulture. Madame Pince rarely raised her voice, yet her presence was sharp and commanding. Her eyes, small and dark, missed nothing. Her bun was always tight, her robes always immaculate. She was never seen outside the library, not at meals, not during feasts, not even at moments of great chaos. It was as if the library itself breathed through her, as if every creaking shelf, every ancient book was an extension of her will. Students feared her more than they feared Peeves. A single whisper beyond the permitted level was met with an ominous hiss. Shh! It was the sound of a curse just short of being uttered. Hermione Granger, who spent countless hours poring over books under Madame Pince's watchful eye, once dared to dog-ear a page. The librarian had nearly hexed her. Madame Pince looked as though someone had suggested she desecrate the Mona Lisa, Hermione later told Harry and Ron, but those who dismissed Madame Pince as simply a cranky librarian failed to see the deeper truth. She was not just protecting books, she was guarding something far more dangerous: power. For hidden within the rows of dusty shelves and shadowed alcoves were not just textbooks and school records, but tomes that pulsed with old magic. Magic capable of great good or unspeakable evil. The restricted section alone was a vault of sorcery most wizards would never be permitted to touch. Behind that iron chain where lantern light barely reached, sat grimoires bound in dragon hide, books that whispered in Parseltongue, and volumes whose ink bled like blood when opened. "There's some weird stuff in there," Harry once told Ron. "I'm pretty sure one book tried to bite me." And yet Madame Pince knew every title. She knew their placement, their history, and perhaps their intentions. During his first year, Harry slipped into the restricted section under the invisibility cloak in search of Nicola Flamel. As he tiptoed between shelves, he accidentally opened a book that let out an unearthly scream. Within seconds, Madame Pince was there, sweeping through the darkness with terrifying speed, shouting, "Who's there?" Though she found no one, her reaction was not merely that of a librarian guarding precious property. It was the reaction of a guardian whose sacred charge had been threatened. Madame Pince's vigilance was not without reason. Consider the Second Wizarding War. As Death Eaters infiltrated every corner of the magical world, Hogwarts remained one of the few places not easily corrupted. Dumbledore, ever the strategist, allowed Severus Snape into the school and even tolerated Sybil Trelawney's nonsense, but he never gave Madame Pince's role away. Her domain was sacred. Even the Carrows, when they took control of the school under Voldemort, rarely ventured into the library. Not out of respect, but out of fear. Rumour had it Madame Pince hexed Amicus Carrow when he tried to remove a book on ancient blood rituals. What most never realised was that Irma Pince was more than a custodian of books. She was a silent historian. She knew every edition of Hogwarts, a history from the first printing to the charmed copies that updated themselves. When the Fat Friar once asked her if she believed in the school's early ghost legends, she replied coldly, "I don't believe I know." She had read diaries from the founders themselves. She had held Rowena Ravenclaw's personal notes, though she never said as much. She had seen what the school had been and what it was in danger of becoming. It was no coincidence that the dark arts section of the restricted section was always perfectly aligned. She had a system more complex than the card catalogue, more intuitive than a spell. She knew when a book had been moved even an inch. When Ginny Weasley had been possessed by Tom Riddle's diary in her first year, it was Madame Pince who first noticed her odd absences from the library, not her friends, not even her professors. And though she could not have known the diary's true nature, she had warned Professor McGonagall that Miss Weasley seems frayed. She's reading, but not truly seeing. Those words, not truly seeing, seemed to capture Madame Pince herself. She always observed, always catalogued, yet never spoke of what she knew. She watched generations of students grow, love, fight, and fail. She saw James Potter prank Severus Snape. She saw Lily Evans rise to top of her class. She saw young Remus Lupin quietly ask for any book on moon charts. She never intervened. She simply watched and remembered. Filch, the caretaker, was her only equal in suspicion and silence. Some whispered that they were lovers, others that they merely shared a love of rules. But if anyone ever asked Madame Pince about Filch, her eyes would narrow and she would reply, "Irrelevant." What mattered to her was the order of things. Not just the order of books, but of time, memory, and meaning. One snowy afternoon during Harry's 5th year, Madame Pince found Luna Lovegood seated cross-legged on the floor between two massive tomes about ancient runes. Luna was whispering to the books, as if they were speaking back. Most would have shooed her away. Pince, instead, watched her for several minutes, then said softly, "If you listen long enough, they do talk back." Luna nodded. That was the only exchange they ever had. Though Madame Pince's presence in the books was rare, her aura loomed over the library like an enchantment. "She's like a curse," Ron once grumbled. "You never know when she'll appear." Yet the truth was that without her, the knowledge housed within those stone walls might have been lost. To careless hands, to reckless spells, to Voldemort himself. In the aftermath of the Battle of Hogwarts, when the school lay in ruins and the Great Hall was turned into a temporary infirmary, Madame Pince was found alone in the library, brushing ash off a copy of Magical Theory by Adelbert Waffling. She did not weep nor call for help. She simply continued cleaning, whispering to each book, "You're safe now. You're home." No one asked her to do it. No one needed to. What was it about her that made her so enduring? Was it her obsessive care for the tomes, or was it something deeper? A quiet understanding that the truest magic lies not in spells or potions, but in knowledge preserved and passed on. The library was Hogwarts' mind, and Madame Pince was its memory. Hermione once wrote, years after the war, that without Madame Pince I would never have survived my years at Hogwarts. She gave me no warmth, no encouragement, no smiles, only access. And that, in the end, was all I needed. It is said that Hermione, as Minister for Magic, ensured that the Hogwarts library received double its usual funding, and that no librarian, ever again, would be treated as merely a keeper of books. The portraits on the walls rarely spoke of Madame Pince, yet one, a painting of a long-dead headmaster from the 1600s, once muttered, "That woman knows more than any of us, but she'll take it to the grave." And so she did. Or perhaps she didn't. Perhaps, somewhere in the depths of the restricted section, behind a false panel or hidden charm, lies a journal, a record of every spell, every secret, every whisper Madame Pince ever heard. The students feared her, yes, but deep down many admired her, not for her demeanour, but for her consistency. In a world where teachers came and went, where dark forces rose and fell, Madame Pince remained, watching, guarding, remembering. If Hogwarts is a place of magic, then its library is a cathedral. And if the library is a cathedral, then Madame Pince was its high priestess, not loud, not friendly, but holy in her own strange way. She never fought in a duel, never joined the order, never stood in front of a classroom, and yet her role was sacred. For magic, unchecked, is chaos. But magic, recorded, remembered, and protected, that is legacy. And it was Madame Pince who ensured that legacy would endure. And perhaps, even now, if one visits the library late at night, when the torches flicker and the shelves creak like old ships, they might hear the faintest sound. Shh. Not a warning, not a threat, but a benediction. A reminder that someone is still watching over the wisdom of Hogwarts.